1, 2, 3, 4. Pedagogy a go-go. Pedagogy go-go-go. Hello and welcome to Pedagogy a Go-Go, a podcast about college faculty sharing what happens in their classrooms and why. This is Season 2, Episode 3, Patterns, Patterns Everywhere, and we are your hosts, Gina Turner and Tom O'Connor. All right. Well, welcome back, Tom.
Welcome back. Happy Halloween.
Oh, that's right. It's the spookiest of all holidays.
Actually, I take that back. I can't say this because this podcast isn't coming out until like the end of November.
Well, we can still talk about the fact that it's Halloween.
I guess so. I was like, this is great. Then I'm like, wait a second. This isn't the podcast we're going to do.
Welcome back, Tom.
Welcome back, Gina. It's good to see you again.
So we missed you last month, but I know you had administratory things
when
you had to do.
Administrative duty calls, I put on my administrator cape and go fight administrative crime.
The administrator
ticketing people in unpaid parking tickets.
Yes, the light was on in the sky, so you had to fly.
So I want to personally begin by thanking Kelly Allen for stepping in at the last minute for me. I just this morning had a chance to listen to the podcast, and it was wonderful. You guys did an amazing job, and
I tried.
Was very upset that I missed out on the opportunity to be there to interview Kate, because she's fabulous and was exactly as fabulous as I expected.
Yeah, that was a really fun conversation. For sure.
So, and I was, you worry when you're replaced. I'm like, is he going to be so good they're not going to invite me back? And it was not a Shemp Curley situation. He was marvelous, and they still let me come back. So I'm back in action in Pedagogy a Go-Go.
Well, I was actually wondering if I was going to have to pull Kelly in, because you can probably hear from my voice that I'm getting over some sort of respiratory situation that I've been fighting for the last week. But Jeff told me my voice didn't sound too scary. So if anybody is disturbed by my voice, blame Jeff.
It's not scary at all. It sounds great.
So I have been anxiously awaiting with my extra credit assignment in my hands because you weren't here last time.
I know. So you got a week's reprieve, I guess, even though you were totally prepared for it. So if memory serves, I had asked you because in the Wayback Time Machine 2 podcasts ago, we were talking about the various modalities you teach in, or mediums, I guess I should say, online, on ground, honors, and I'd asked you kind of to reflect on your pedagogical practices in all of those forms and how each of them inform the other.
Mm-hmm. And you know what? I actually have a short answer, which is they are becoming more and more similar every semester. So, especially because technology has allowed me to do both online stuff in my in-person classes and vice versa. So I think I mentioned a couple podcasts ago that I was required to start having my students do videos in my online class, for example. So now I even have an opportunity to see the faces of my online students, because it's a requirement that we are doing for academic honesty. Right. That we're asking for some way of verifying the identity of our online students. And so the methodology that I've been using for my online classes is to have them do videos, to film themselves doing things. And so that's actually really fun. And it's bridged yet another gap that I have between, not being able to see those online students in person. But because there are so many resources available through the publishers now with the textbooks, I've basically switched to textbooks in my in-person classes that offer a lot of online resources so that they can do a lot of online assessments and homework, and then we can spend our class in discussion and in project work, which is exactly what I have my online classes do. So they do these online, assessments and activities, and then they operate in discussion boards. And then for some of my online classes, they also do group work. So that's kind of my answer, is that technology is really allowing for there to be a lot of similarity. And I feel better than I ever have about equity across those different platforms.
I love that. I love that answer. And I also, it's funny, I'm hoping that you talked about the various forms of assessment. And I know that our guest today has done a lot with inquiry-based learning and speaks a lot to the way we do assessment. So I'm hoping that actually comes up in today's discussion.
Yeah.
The other thing that you didn't quite speak to as you were really going online versus on ground is I was thinking about honors too. And there is, he did some writing theory. I think it was probably in the 70s and 80s. And I'm going to get the name wrong. I believe his name was Donald Bartholomew. And I always screw him up because there's a famous short story author called Donald Bartholomew. And I'm pretty sure it's Bartholomew. And he was a real big fan of introducing writing that was more advanced than we might expect. So the idea of reading up to a higher level. So I was reflecting on him in honors classes, and I asked, well, what if we taught, every 100 level class as if it was an honors class, and the students rise to that level.
But what I will say about honors is that my honors class has also become very similar to my non-honors version of intro psychology. Because, again, I require them to read both classes to read outside the text. So I do expect my non-honors intro to be operating at a higher level, on Bloom's taxonomy. It's just a lot more structured, the work that they're doing. I'm giving them a lot more scaffolding. I'm giving them smaller pieces of the puzzle that they have to put together for their projects. Whereas in the honors, they require less of the scaffolding, but they're really doing the same project-based work. So, but yeah, I mean, we're exploring the same readings in my intro class that's not honors as we explore in my honors class. I may require the honors class to read the whole article and read snippets in my intro. But again, I feel sort of ethically that I want all versions of the class to be to have a lot of similarity.
Right. And I'm thinking back on talking to honors, and I probably misspoke a little bit because there is kind of a myth that honors classes are harder in some way. And that's not actually the case. They're usually a smaller class size. We try to expand out assignments, right? We might have more of a service learning component. And we also allow students to be in an environment where they are surrounded by high achieving peers, right? That may elevate a discourse. But at the same time, I guess like in terms of assignments, why don't we always ask that of our students in terms of like, if we set a task that says, you can take more meaningful charge of this assignment yourself. You can be a bit more self-directed in how you choose to approach it. I mean, I think that's something that Dennis is going to speak to too, given that he teaches every level of math, from developmental, from the classes that people who are not ready for college level math need to get them caught up, all the way up to our highest level of classes. So it'll be interesting to hear what he has to say about that too. At this point, and we've been bandying Dennis's name around at this point that I feel like he's Kaiser Sose. So it seems an optimum time to introduce the man himself, Dennis Ebersole, who I have to say I'd never had really a chance to sit down to talk to until today. So I'm super excited about that. But he's been at Northampton Community College, where we work, for 49 years. Which I saw that and I was kind of like, that's incredible to spend, almost 50 years at the same, what I'm hoping and I'm sure will be 50 years for a golden anniversary next year here at Northampton, and to be through all the changes. And he's been an amazing force for good and for change here at Northampton Community College. He's taught in our math department for the better part of those 49 years. He is a passionate devotee of mystery novels, I'm given to understand, and he is an all-around passionate guy about reaching his students and working for their success. So I anticipate a wonderful interview with him today.
Looking forward to it. If you had just one word to describe yourself as a teacher, what would it be? I think we just start talking. Uh-oh. So
You won't get me stopped.
good, perfect.
That sounds like the perfect place to begin.
It does.
So we're in the studio today with Dennis Ebersole. We're so happy to have you here as our guest. First and foremost, thank you for being on Pedagogy Go-Go today.
Thank you. Well, thank you and Kelly for thinking of me. I mean, I would never have thought of me, but
Well,
We think of you fondly.
we do, and it was a real, it was an opportunity for me to get to know you better. It's unusual, that I meet a guest beforehand, and I just started asking you some questions about yourself. And as you were talking and I was getting to know you, I'm like, oh my God, I wish we were recording right now. Why did I ask Dennis all of these questions beforehand?
Yeah.
So I might circle back to some of what we were talking about earlier, but we usually begin with our guests asking this question. Dennis, what do you teach and why?
Okay, so I teach mathematics here, and I teach everything, from the developmental, the basically high school math, all the way through the calculus sequence. And I really, until recently, I've always wanted to teach 5 different classes every semester, so that I, wasn't bored, I guess. I wasn't getting in a rut or anything like that. So, now recently I've been trying co-requisite courses. I'm going to be trying 7.5-week courses because the research on both of those is excellent. So in this last spring, I'm just so pleased I had co-requisite courses for intermediate algebra and college algebra.
Okay.
Those both were barely above 50% success rate in each one. So somebody who starts in intermediate, the probability that they pass college algebra is in the 20%, 25% range. I just had one incomplete pass, so 70% passed intermediate algebra.
Wow.
100% of those pass college algebra.
Oh, that's fantastic.
That's incredible.
I've never had that kind of success rate. Never.
Wow.
And just for our audience, so we're clear when we talk about these kind of co-requisites, or oftentimes they're referred to as sidecars. Mm-hmm. So we know that students who begin purely at the developmental level struggle to succeed to completion.
Right.
And so they
don't get through fast enough. They end up being here for many years when we need to speed that up.
Yeah.
And so what we're talking about is a student taking that higher level developmental coursework alongside at the same time as the 100 level, in this case, college algebra.
Yes, that's the idea.
So that's incredible, actually, that those kind of, I love that we're already in numbers talking to a math professor. In terms of,
You're not going to get away from numbers, I'm sorry.
Well, Dennis, I was happy that we get to meet again because I remember we got to work together on the diversity task force.
Yes,
now,
that was
how
long ago was that?
5 years.
Yeah, but I mean, we got Scott Blair.
Yes,
I
who is our
mean,
chief diversity
this guy
officer.
is just phenomenal.
He's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll
and
have to
we
get
would
him.
not have him, I don't think, if it wasn't for that task force.
I agree. I think we can.
And the other thing that I think was crucial that we did there was to say that in the application, we want applicants to tell us how they can deal, what are they going to do to deal with diversity?
Right.
That
Ways
inclusion idea is so important today.
Yeah.
And we were not doing that. We had no clue.
Right. So to kind of expand on what Dennis was saying, one of the things that we identified was that for full-time faculty and for higher level administration, as part of the application packet, they have to write a statement on how they have address diversity and inclusion and equity in the past in their careers and how they might think about it coming forward into this position. And that was an outcome out of our diversity task force, which was a year-long task force that was convened by our president, Dr. Erickson. And then I think of when you were on the task force talking to you about how you've always been so interested in equity in terms of these developmental classes. And then hearing you talk about having students all the way from developmental up to calculus. Have you seen students of yours go from developmental all the way through to calculus?
There's a student that I can't take any responsibility for it, but he came here and started in elementary algebra, the lowest course we had at that time. Mm-hmm. He went through the entire developmental sequence, went through college algebra, trig, did Calc 1, Calc 2, Calc 3, differential equations, went to Penn State. They were so impressed with him that they put him immediately into a postdoctoral program. Not just doctoral, but...
Oh my gosh. Wow.
And this was a student who started at the developmental level.
Yeah, exactly.
That's incredible.
That's fantastic.
I had him in Calc 3, and he would come to me and say that he was reading the original German treatise from this, Euler, who's this monster in mathematics history. I mean, he just, was so unbelievable. He was an Einstein kind of person who had his hands in so many different branches of mathematics. He's reading him in the original German, and he's asking me questions on there. I've been teaching arithmetic and elementary algebra, intermediate algebra, and then the calculus sequence. I have not been doing anything at the graduate level in years.
Yeah. Wow.
And I think you better talk to somebody who's a little closer to it.
Yeah.
But he just amazed me.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that there have been others that have gone from the beginning all the way to the end. Our problem is that nationwide, it's around, if you start at the lowest level, it's around 10% that actually pass the first college level math course.
Okay.
Which is criminal.
Yeah.
It is. Janice, I had a question actually, and Gina kind of beat me to the punch, because when you spoke about this desire to want to teach math at all of these levels, to have 5 different preps, anyone who talks to you for 5 minutes can sense your passion for teaching, and you spoke to this desire to challenge yourself. When you were speaking to that, though, teaching at the development level and teaching these higher calc classes, what are some of the particular pleasures that you associate with these very different demographics of students at different stages?
Yeah, so they are completely different. What should I say? Highs for me. Okay.
But they're all highs. That's so
But they're
great.
all highs.
Yeah.
There's very little lows. If it weren't that it takes me so long to grade, you'd never get me out of here. But anyways, with the developmental, the real wonderful thing there is that when you see them actually change their definition of mathematics, okay, and a light bulb goes on, and they're starting to think of math in a different way. Most students in developmental math think of math as just formulas that you memorize, algorithms that you memorize, that there's only one way to do something, there's only one right answer. So my goal in all my classes, but certainly there, is to get them to understand, without actually saying it, my definition of mathematics, which is that mathematics is the study of patterns. And think about humans. Throughout, our history, we've always found ways of coming up with patterns.
Yeah.
I mean, there's I don't know if you've heard of the Fibonacci sequence. And it's an abstract sequence where you just take the 2 previous numbers, add them to get the next. But we find the Fibonacci sequence in nature all the time.
Yeah, in shell patterns. And...
Was nature designed around the Fibonacci sequence? Or I think it's we just have to find patterns. And so we sort of enforce patterns. It's sort of like looking at clouds.
Yeah.
And you see things.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that our brains are trying to make sense of the world.
Yes.
And that math is just another way in which
And
we try to make
so
sense
then,
of the world.
what I want them to realize is that mathematics is the vehicle to really understand the world around you.
Yeah.
That we can create mathematical models that allow you to predict what will happen in the future.
Yeah.
That you can apply all these things you're learning. And so I try to start with an application before anything else.
Yeah, that's what I was really struck by. So Dennis shared with us a couple of the assignments that he uses in his class.
That was hard.
Oh my
I
God.
love so many of them.
I know, that was so great. In his email, when he emailed them to us, he said, "This is like asking me to choose between my son and my daughter."
It is literally, so we've asked this assignment of everyone that we've had on the show, and yours remains my favorite answer. and so I also just want to say it is such a pleasure to be in a room with someone who teaches a discipline far removed from my own and feel the pleasure of what it's like to be in your class. Because as you were just talking about patterns, I was like, my life could have taken a very different path if I had Dennis Ebersole teaching me math, in high school or in college. Because
we can still get him. He's young.
It's not too late.
It's not too late.
Never too late.
Right.
Well, you made me think of how I always tell my psychology students that when they go into major or with our psychology major, they're going to have to take statistics, and those who haven't taken are like, and I say no, but statistics is great because it's
all applications.
It's all application. It's all like how you use these tools to understand the answer to a question. I'm going to start using this idea that it's patterns. It helps you to identify patterns, because that's my favorite description of math I've ever heard, is this idea that it helps to identify patterns. And then one of the assignments that you also use the idea that you can see this big idea in math. And it was the big idea of, please.
For the past 10 years, my focus has been on finding big ideas.
Yeah.
So the one I gave you was one of those Homer Simpson. It's like, how could you have been teaching math for almost 40 years and not have seen this? It's so obvious.
Huh.
And so, what it was is I was saying, okay, you have an expression,
Mathematical
and
expression.
when you replace the x in that expression, or whatever the variable name is, by a number. To evaluate that expression, you use what my students call PEMDAS.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The
What
order
is
of
it?
operation.
Please? What is it?
So parentheses is the P, and some people remember it with the mnemonic, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. But the idea is, okay, when you're doing that, what you're doing is, okay, you're saying, okay, anything in parentheses, we have to do that first. Then if there's any exponents, and exponents would include radicals because those are fractional exponents, they're done next. And then we continue on, we do multiplication and division, then we do addition and subtraction. And we get the answer. Think about an equation, a simple equation like 2x divided by 3 minus 5 equals 7. Okay? Now you have the answer 7. And you're trying to figure out what x to put in to make it come out to 7, right? Doesn't it make sense? You would just reverse everything.
Yeah.
Reverse engineer it. So the last thing I would do in evaluating that expression, if I knew what x was add and subtract.
Okay.
So the first thing I do in solving it is eliminate any addition or subtraction outside parentheses.
Okay.
The next to the last thing, the next level, is multiplication and division. So what you want to do is undo, if you're multiplying by 2, divide by 2.
Yeah.
If you're dividing by 3, multiply by 3.
And it was
And
so
it's
cool because I read your description of this and I was like, oh, I haven't read math description in a long time. Maybe I'll just like
It was
skip
so
this.
clear.
Well, it was very clear.
Well, that was iteration 10.
But then when I actually looked at and then I was just like, let me look at the problems and see if I remember how to do these. And then as soon as I looked at the problems, I was like, oh, he's right. That's exactly what I do. And I didn't even realize.
But it was
yeah.
how could we have not seen that
Right.
pattern?
But of course,
before?
it probably took you teaching this for so long to see something that is now obvious to you that you can now convey so clearly to your students.
And so, what's really wonderful about the co-requisite course is normally I would only be teaching them to solve a couple types of equations. But because I'm doing 2 courses in one semester, they're doing all these different types of equations. And guess what?
They're making those connections.
They all can be done if you rearrange the equation so it has just one x variable or one variable in it. If you can do that, then you can solve it using my PEMDAS in reverse.
That's so
It can be exponential functions, it can be logarithmic functions, it can be radical square root functions, quadratic functions. They all can be done in the same way. So,
so cool.
I look back at the textbooks that I had when I was, and it was like memorize this for this type. Even for one type, linear, they had this is how you do it if it's multiplication. This is how you do it if you're dividing. This is how you do it.
Right.
It's like you're memorizing. Why not have a big idea that carries through?
Yeah, exactly.
I love
exactly.
that this is the assignment that you described in all your humility as the pedestrian of the 2 assignments.
It is.
There's nothing, I mean, like, clear-cut simplicity, something that helps us see larger patterns at work and the operations at play, to me is never pedestrian. But meanwhile, your other assignment you described as sexy, which made me happy. And then when I actually read the assignment, I got so excited to talk to you because it was sexy, because it actually, I mean, like, I have never seen a math assignment that had a social justice component.
Yeah.
I read the assignment. It has a freaking footnote for National Geographic on it. And it also involved like real world modeling and application. So students could see math at work, in this case, documenting the relationship between deforestation and palm oil.
Yes.
In what country, I forget.
Which is it's getting close to a crisis right now.
And the last question after they've done all of the mathematical calculations is, what can you do to reduce the demand for palm oil? So not only are you having them use a very real world situation to make their calculations on, but then you're saying, now you've given yourself the evidence that this is a problem, which is such a great example of critical thinking, of using critical thinking.
Well, I really try to bring those in whenever I can. It's not always easy. I searched a long time to find this
it made
article.
me want to cheer when I read it.
Yeah, so that was, it's so exciting when I find something that really does fit, that I just really, and then I want to immediately take the day off and write that project.
Yes, you should.
So.
Well, one question we always ask is, can you? I don't know if you can, because you've got so many different ways of conceptualizing how you teach, but could you boil down your conception of yourself as a teacher in one word? What word would you use to describe yourself?
Okay, so constructivist.
Constructivist. Can you say more about that?
So what does that mean? Okay, well, it's interesting because in 1990, when I got my first grant to work with K-12, the C word, constructivism, was anathema in the K-12 community.
Okay.
And yet, to me, that is truth to power.
Okay.
Constructivism is very simple in the sense that students construct their own meaning.
Okay.
They are not empty vessels that we pour stuff into.
Yeah.
Everything that we learn is filtered through what we've learned in the past. Okay? So if I try to make you think about a problem the way and do the problem the way it makes sense to me, I'm shortchanging you.
Yeah. Yeah.
You would end up just memorizing Dennis's method instead of inventing Jeff's method.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I thought maybe the other way I could have said it is coach.
Okay.
Okay. Because what I want is for the students to get immersed in the mathematics, for them to be acting like mathematicians as best they can at this stage in their career.
Yeah.
And my job is to set up the practices, the experiences, so that they do grow, that they do start to see these patterns, they do start to see how things are related. And so what's really important then is that they are the one, as I tell them, your instructor's lazy. If I am the one doing all the mathematics, then I'm the only one learning. So I am not going to be the one doing the mathematics. You're the one going to do the mathematics. I'm not going to be the problem solver. You're going to be the problem solver. You're the one who's going to create the models.
Yeah.
What I have to do is create a way that the jump is not too much.
Right.
They don't get over frustrated.
Yeah.
But research is pretty clear. If you're not frustrated in a class, then you're not learning in that class.
Yeah.
If everything comes easy to you in that class, why are you there?
Right.
Or what's the instructor doing that they're not challenging you?
Yeah.
So students in math classes, in my experience, they're used to being frustrated, right? They're frustrated by math and they give up. How do you create an environment where students can become frustrated with the math, but don't give up, right? But persist?
Yes. So to me, the key is, what can I say? When you've been teaching for 48 years, you have all these. Another thing that I believe really strongly is that it's learning is a social activity. And so what you'll find is in my classes, they're doing small group work virtually every day.
Okay.
Every class period.
Yeah.
Okay. And so what happens is I have the class community, but then I have these little communities, these 4 students who work together. And when I can get them to teach each other, when I can get them to say to somebody, why weren't you here last class? And so me saying, you missed class, and have them say, well, you have to be here, holding each other accountable. They have the support now.
So do you do that small group work and keep those groups consistent throughout an entire semester?
I give them, thank you, I give them the option at mid-semester of staying with the group or switching.
Oh, that's a great idea.
I like that.
And if even one group wants to switch, then we switch.
Okay.
It's rare that anybody wants to switch.
Yeah.
They say, no, I like my group. Now what happens sometimes is just by the luck of the draw, you'll have a group where 3 of them, for whatever reason, just are never really got into it. And so what I have to do is find a group for that person that's left over.
Dennis, can I ask, I know that prior to my time at NCC, I believe you led some professional development for other faculty built around inquiry-based learning.
Yeah.
Is kind of some of what you're describing, does it relate to that in some way?
Yes.
And what is inquiry? It sounded like it. So can you talk a little bit about what inquiry-based learning is all about?
So the idea of inquiry-based learning is, and mine sort of, some is inquiry-based learning, others is guided inquiry. There's a difference, but it's still, it's important, okay? Inquiry-based learning is where you set it up that the students are actually, given a problem and allowed to struggle with it and really massage it and really get, into the problem and have to really do some critical thinking, like what kind of assumptions do I have to make, or what data do I still need, or, which of course can be very, very frustrating for them because they're not, they're used to having somebody say, do this, then do this, then do this, and that's not inquiry. So I have a number of projects where they're really immersed in. It's almost like they're researchers. They're actually, getting into this problem, and they're coming up with their own way of approaching it in their own way. And then I ask them to write about, the thinking that went into it. What it, was the, how did they engage with the mathematics? Why did they do this, not this, that kind of thing. A lot of them that I do are guided inquiry, especially in the developmental math, where I don't want them to get so, they're so used to being told they can't do this that I want them to have success early on. Yeah. So what I'll do is, I'll sort of push them to look at something in a certain way, or I'll provide some scaffolding to make it a little easier for those students who don't feel comfortable just taking off and exploring the math and exploring the problem and trying different things.
Yeah. So do you find yourself being able to use that inquiry-based method with even a Calc 3 class?
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I suppose because they have so much knowledge about the uses of calculus by that point that they can
But it's still problem solving.
Yeah.
If it's really problem solving, it means it's something you haven't encountered before.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you, but if I encounter a new problem, I end up going back to ground zero.
Yeah, it's true.
Have you seen that in yourself?
You use the earlier strategies.
Yeah, you start using strategies that are not the more sophisticated ones that you've been using because it's so brand new.
Yeah.
Okay, and so part of it is, just getting out of that and just realizing what you're doing and then say, time out, let's go back at this again, but let's have a process. And that's why, it's so important to me, and I think for my students, for them to really feel comfortable with Polya's heuristic approach.
Okay.
Because it doesn't matter how simple or how complex the problem is, you still have to understand the problem, and that means really just playing around with the problem, just trying things out. Guess and check is a good way of getting a better understanding of a problem. And then, you want to, one of my faculty members, Jerry King at Lehigh University, wrote a book where he talks about when you're problem solving or when you're modeling, you start in the real world, but then the second step of Polya's method is to move it from the real world into the mathematical world. Okay. And so you move out of the real world into this imaginary world in the sense that, numbers are imaginary.
Yeah.
You're never going to run into a number. They're all in our head. Everything that we do in math is imaginary.
Right.
Tell that to my wallet. It runs into zero frequently.
Yes. So, but when you're in the mathematical world, now everything behaves.
That is a really satisfying thing about math.
Because we have the structure.
Yeah, yeah.
And so all these Kelly doesn't behave, but that's another story. But we have all these, we've built up the structure of definitions and axioms, and then we have theorems, and we all of a sudden we have all this stuff, and we know how everything works in that world. And so you create a mathematical model in that world. You can now use the mathematics that that we've been working with to talk about what happens if this changes, or what happens if that changes. And so, we have all these models for climate change, but we have models just for the weather on a daily basis. We have models for, what will happen if we
do anything, really. That's...
we can understand why, how bad it was for all those palm trees to be planted.
Right.
On this, you cut down old growth rainforest,
right,
and plant palm trees.
Yeah, in the problem you
the
gave
oxygen
us.
Generation has gone from way up there down to practically nothing.
Yeah.
So I'm a visual thinker, and that's kind of my process. So it's funny, as you were talking about inquiry-based learning versus guided inquiry, I imagined inquiry-based learning as a group of your students parachuting into a problem set of a jungle, right?
Yes.
And field testing, right? And using, as you said it, the heuristic method as a means towards getting out of the jungle kind of on their own, maybe with some occasional guidance in the form of a question.
A lot of
guidance.
Socratic questioning.
Yeah.
Yes.
And guided would be more you're parachuting alongside of them and acting as a little bit of a guide on that journey, in and out of that problem set.
I don't allow them to go on too many, side
tangents.
So what would be like in terms of to use the palm? Maybe I'm thinking of jungles because of the palm olive and the deforestation, the rainforest discussion. But how would I, as a student in a group, apply the heuristic method to that problem set?
Okay, so if we think about what's going on there, they had to understand what are the numbers that are important to us. Okay. Mm-hmm. And the wonderful thing was in the National Geographic, they talked about it, but they talked about where they got their data. And so I was able to go to that website and get all this data on what was happening with the, the production of the oil in the rainforest. Because the more production, obviously, the more they had to burn trees and cut them down and burn them, and so you had a double whammy: less oxygen generating trees, and you're putting CO2 into the atmosphere. So, so they have to, all the problem solving, they have to understand what are the important constants. And sometimes those are not presented.
Yeah.
Other times, most of the time, there's numbers in there that you don't want to use.
Exactly.
So you have to know which are the extraneous things. Then you want to know what's varying, what's changing. And that means you have to understand what are the variables that are going to be important to us. Then, if you're modeling, by this time, they've developed this library of functions. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And they have to, from a table, be able to recognize which one of these 20 functions
is appropriate
for this data.
And you called this Polya's heuristic, is that right?
Yes, George Polya was a geometer.
Okay.
His specialty was geometry.
Okay.
But he lived to 93, I think.
Oh, wow.
Was still at Stanford at
Hopefully,
93.
unlike Sir Isaac Newton, was not still a virgin when he died.
Yes.
True story.
Okay.
He claimed it was the thing he was most proud of. Sorry, I'm not kidding.
I'm learning so much.
That's, in my math class, in my calculus class, that's what I took from it. Not the calculus, the fact that Sir Isaac Newton was a virgin when he died.
That's the
This
critical,
tells me something
critical
about
theorist
Tom,
in the
yes.
room. Yes.
Dennis, can I ask you, so much of what you're saying speaks to kind of what you do to bring your classroom alive, and that's a space that you control. I know that you've done some grant work in K-12, and that you've played, we talked about the diversity committee. I know of some other major committees that have directed the college in some of the paths that it has moved along. Sorry for the long intro to this question. So I was wondering, as someone who's deeply invested in the successful outcomes of his students, if you could change one thing about your profession or about higher ed in general, using either Northampton community specifically or about higher education, college community, 4-year and graduate, what could, if you could change? You've got your wand, you wave it in the air. What would you change?
Okay, I've said this before, but let me say it again, and maybe it'll gain some traction.
I'm sensing a pattern here.
Yes, it gains some traction, but it's, to me, I think it's really, really important that our job is to generate learning on the student's part. Mm-hmm. And yet, we keep, having them do something, and immediately we assess it and assign it a grade. The research is extremely powerful and very clear. As soon as I put a grade on some work that a student has done, the student says, that's done, they put it aside, no more learning occurs. So what I'd like to see is for us to have as little grading as we possibly can. So I can tell you a little bit about what I do. Now, this research was started by a couple of people from England, Paul Black and Dylan William. And when I was working on a $12.5 million grant with a lot of people, but some people, friends of mine from the Philadelphia area, Dylan William came from England to the United States, and he trained me.
Wow.
And a whole bunch of, all of the senior staff got trained by Dylan William in assessment for learning, which is this idea that you assess not to grade, but you assess so that students can learn, okay? And so working with him, I came up with this idea that what I do with my group projects now, what I used to do was have them do it, collect it, grade it, hand it back, and that was it.
That's the end.
That was the end. So now, basically, it's not graded in a usual way. They think it's graded, but really it's not. What I say to them is, I expect perfection from your team on every one of these.
Wow.
I do not give you a group project just for fun and games. They're all important concepts and they're being developed by these group projects. So I want you to master it. So like Kelly would do in English, I have the group work on the project, they hand it in, and because I'm not totally masochistic, I pick one of the 4 randomly, and that's the one that I go through.
One of the 4 groups.
No. I pick every group gets comments from me.
Okay.
But I there's 4. So if most of my classes are like 35 students, so I have 9 groups. Instead of grading 35 papers, I'm grading 9 papers.
Okay.
Gotcha. Okay. But what I do is I go through it, and any place I see a misconception, I write questions or I write comments. I show them where the mistake is, and I ask them to think about it. I then have them go back to their group and work on that.
Okay.
Work on the ones that I wrote comments about. There's no grade attached.
Yeah.
And they keep doing this until I'm satisfied that they really understand it now.
Wow.
Now, the carrot is they all get 100% once they got it.
Once they've gotten
Okay.
it. Yeah.
But in essence, I'm just saying, if you're willing to do the work, you deserve 100%.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, guess what? Things that used to just, and then I give I give a few evaluations, a couple of tests, and then the final exam.
Yeah.
They would just bomb them.
Yeah.
That's not happening anymore.
Wow.
Because they're engaging
Wow.
with it. They're talking to each other about my comments,
Yeah.
my questions. And, they're coming to me outside of class.
Yeah.
Always hard to get them to come to your office, but
Yes.
I'm getting more of them to
But
come
they're
to my
doing it.
office. It's just so wonderful because
That's amazing.
they don't stop learning.
Right, right. It's so powerful because we've talked to a few people in here, and I'm really trying to make my classes a lot more project-based. But it's really that it's not just a project, it's an iterative project. It's a project that is getting consistent feedback, and not only feedback, fix it, but feedback, figure out what you need to do to fix it with my assistance. That's really powerful.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, it's really powerful.
It's near and dear to my heart on a number of levels, and I want to make sure I unpack something that's really important. What you're saying is that for both those listening who are out there who are teachers as well as students, both sets, teachers and students, fall into this idea of thinking of assessment only in terms of grades, and they're disconnected. Actually,
Absolutely.
There's so many other ways.
There's formative and there's evaluative, right? Or summative.
Yep.
Is what I guess you would say, summative, right? But yeah,
and even
we want to do more formative.
That's exactly right. And in some cases, even a summative assessment might not take the form of a grade. When I was in a different lifetime ago, when I was a graduate student at Lehigh, I was closely involved in an unfortunately now defunct school within the School of Arts and Humanities called South Mountain College, which it moved entirely gradeless. So where students were assessment always took the form of documented feedback and constructive criticism. And
were you talking about what they were capable of doing?
That's exactly
and
right.
You had a goal of where you wanted them to be, and so that they knew a little bit about how far along that path they were.
Yep, and it was cross-disciplinary, and it took what you were talking about before about students having to come to learning on their own, not just modeling your way of understanding the material.
We don't want
so it sought that out. It was a beautiful experiment that is no longer around for reasons unrelated to what I think were successful assessments for the students that were more social engineering and putting a bunch of students in the same living space. And anyway, that's another podcast.
Yes.
But
yeah.
but I just want to say
Exactly.
that we should be working to break that mindset for both teachers and for students, that they don't think about progress in terms of, because for students, and time and again, and oftentimes it's the best students, they want to know what they need to do to get the A.
Yeah.
And that we can keep that, as you say, that's the carrot at the end, and we can be kind of thoughtful and a little manipulative about how we build that path out
so
to get
that
them
they
to
are
carrot,
actually
that they're
learning.
engaging
Yeah,
that process and finding other goals and use value in what they're learning.
And what you said brought up this idea: if the adjuncts are really dependent right now on how the students think about them, if we don't change the way what students think about what learning, teaching and learning looks like, we're never going to get the adjuncts
Right.
to buy into this,
Right.
because their students are going to, I've had students tell me, 3 weeks into a class, when are you going to start teaching?
Yeah.
Because they're deaf.
You're Mr.
definition.
Miyagiing them. You have to go move on to wax on, wax off.
And I've had students similarly like, what is my grade in this class? And I'm like, I don't have a grade for you yet in this class. I will add everything up at the end, I promise.
I mean, and
right now
it
we're
just it's like
yeah.
they're still so focused
Right.
on the grade.
Right.
And I tell them, that's not important. What's
Yeah.
important is the learning that you're going to be able to.
Yeah.
Are you going to have something that goes into long-term memory that you then end
Yes.
up using in unanticipated ways?
Right. And so we do have to teach our students how we're teaching them.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
I had a brutal IRQ one time recently. It was maybe 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And it was all about them not understanding what I was doing and why I was doing it.
Right, because
And
it's so different.
That's when I took something that the critical thinking institute that I had gone to out in California at Berkeley. What I did is I took that, and now the first class is all about my role as the coach, and I let them pick the do you want basketball, football, baseball, whatever.
That's
but
great.
The analogy is, if a football coach had you sit in class and listen to him talk about playing football for all the preseason.
Yeah.
And then you went out to play the game, what's going to happen?
Right. That's great.
And yet you want me to do that.
Right. That's
You
so great.
sit there passively and don't do anything and expect somehow miraculously you're going to win the game.
Kick a field goal.
Yes, right.
Too often that's been their model at the secondary level.
Yes.
Well, so this gives me a perfect opportunity to segue into our last question for you, sadly, today. So you were talking about sports, but it doesn't have to be sports related. But our last question is always, what is a thing that you are willing to share with us that you enjoy doing? We call it the non-guilty pleasure.
Yes.
That people might not know about you.
Almost nobody knows this, but I'm an addict.
Oh, dear, Dennis.
I'm addicted to Sudoku. I get antsy if I don't do at least one difficult Sudoku puzzle every day.
Wow.
I usually do multiple.
So I
Sudokus every day.
can't do even easy Sudoku. Drives me crazy. But my husband is a natural at Sudoku, and he loves the hard. He can do the hard.
If they're
Sudoku.
too easy, it's like, well, why am I doing this? Right?
Yeah. Well, you need that frustration.
Exactly. You're right.
Otherwise, how will you grow, Dennis?
I will not grow. Yes. So, I now know I do have an addictive personality.
I think that this is.
But don't tell anybody, right?
There are meetings.
This
for
is
it.
never going to get out of this room, right?
Never.
Sudoku Anonymous. I'll send you some info.
I don't think we have to stage an intervention. Well, thank you so much. This has been so great.
It's been an
I've
absolute
had so much fun.
Pedagogy a go-go. Pedagogy go-go-go.
Well, welcome back, Gina. That was amazing.
What a fun conversation.
It's so funny. I think I said this to Dennis as we were speaking to him. I got really excited when he submitted his assignments.
Yeah.
And because I'm gonna confess something here that I am one of those students who came to believe that they're just bad at math, and the path that I took in my own life steered out of that curve. And as he was talking, and I say to him a couple of times, I said to him that I wish you'd been my math instructor, because even today, it's funny. I recently did a classroom observation of a math class. It was statistics, and as I was sitting in the statistics class, I was one thing that I do in observations is I try to come at the material fresh, I'm learning alongside the students, and I was having real anxiety trying to get the math, and it was not the professor's fault. They were great. It was all on me, and our students, I think, carry a lot of the reading and math tend to be the two areas we know that students come in with a ton of anxieties, and Dennis's manner, the way he approaches math, is I hate to call it unique because I know that other math instructors are doing it, but he truly carries so much of himself into it, speaking to seeing math differently, to getting out of it as a set of formulas, which is how I always understood it. It's memorization and formulas. And he had me convinced that if I was in his class, that I would be able to move beyond that, to see the kind of processes working behind it, to see that larger picture and the patterns that are at work.
Well, I mean, I can speak as someone who actually liked math and was good at math, and I actually was going to be a math teacher when I first went to college. And then I ended up in a 700-person lecture hall at the University of Washington. And that was not a good format for learning for me. And that's all I'll say about my GPA when I went to college. And I kind of forgot about that. But then when Dennis sent the exercise talking about the big idea that, that we describe in the interview, I was looking at the math and I was like, oh my gosh, I just learned something I've never learned about math before. So like for someone who actually liked math and, had to take statistics in grad school and all that good stuff, to have learned yet a new thing about math was so cool today. So he's obviously someone who just keeps pushing himself as a teacher, which I think is really great.
Well, and I can honestly say that as a teacher within the humanities, I've often felt like teaching math is like exists on an alien planet from teaching literature, from teaching gender studies or film. I've never felt so close to a math professor before in terms of kind of my pedagogical approaches.
Yeah, he's similar to really, I think, everyone we've talked about here, where he's got this overarching big idea or this overarching way of looking at his discipline. And then it becomes meaningful in a way that you're not just memorizing a list of terms or memorizing a list of formulas, right? Because, a humanities can be taught as memorize a list of poetry styles or, any discipline can be taught in that way, or it can be taught as here, let's plug this into something.
Just silently judge those people and pretend they don't exist.
Well, and it was too bad we didn't get a chance to ask Dennis if he had an experience as a student.
I know. This is what happens when you have a great interviewee. I mean, because he was amazing in every question that we asked him. And I was like, I wanted to have another 45 minutes.
Yeah. But I get the sense that he has continued to be a student, right? Because he talked about getting trained in this inquiry-based learning, right? And you could see his eyes light up and his hands gesticulating as he talked about meeting the person who had developed this method. He's a lifelong student.
He shares my inclination to bang the table on occasion, which I have tried to get under control, but I think it will add fun emphasis to this recording. I have to say, when as I said, today was the first chance I really got to talk to Dennis, and we were talking for 30, 40 minutes before we sat down for the interview. And every time I asked him the most generic question about, himself or what he's been doing, he'd start to talk and I'd be like, why did I ask him that question? I want to record that.
Oh, yeah.
And he absolutely spoke to that in terms of, because he was telling me that he went for an advanced degree in computer science at the time of the boom. Yeah. Coming back expecting to teach it, and then the boom died down, and he ended up back teaching math. And then he still took that that information and tried to funnel it back into NCC. Right. In other ways, in terms of helping out, in terms of networking and moving us off of out-of-date IBM systems. And, Dennis speaks a slightly different language to me, so I don't want to misstate things that he has done for the college. Right. But he's just so deeply invested in not just the lived day-to-day of teaching our students, but the inner workings and processes of the institution itself.
And really caring, again, he cares so deeply about equity for students and trying to address these achievement gaps for students. And I just really, I admire him so much as an instructor. And really this leads into the extra credit assignment that I have for you, Tom.
I'm all set.
What is your most recent experience as a student, and as formally as possible? But if you don't have a formal experience, that's okay. But I really am thinking about that question that you and I didn't get a chance to ask Dennis. What is a formal experience as a student that you've had, and what have you taken from it, good and bad? In terms of applying it to what you do now.
Boy,
so that's your extra credit.
I already know where I'm going to go with my answer. I'll give this as a means of a sneak preview. So the last formal experience I had as a student is the reason I missed the last podcast.
Oh, okay. Okay.
It was for 2 full days of training in Philly, and I will talk about that because it was on many levels a remarkable experience that I'm still actually processing and reflecting on. So I'm glad I don't have to answer that today.
All right,
and
cool.
I appreciate the opportunity to actually reflect on it more, as it involves also a new role for me here at NCC.
Oh, okay. Very cool. Well, I'm glad I tapped into something that is of relevance to you.
You have a means of asking perfect questions and giving perfect assignments. So
I do what I can.
You're something else.
I try.
Oh, man.
And I'm not even well.
Well, till next time. I really want to do a fancy accent. Till next time. I don't know. Was that fancy? No, it wasn't fancy at all. Till next time. No, that's Monty Python. Oh, I am getting the thumbs down from Jeff in the background.
I'm not sure what's happening.
I'm failing. If you ever want to model failure, look no further.
Well, hopefully I have my voice back next time we record. And otherwise, happy end of October.
Happy end of October. Hey, thanks for listening to Pedagogy A Go-Go, recorded in the Center for Teaching, Learning, and Technology at Northampton Community College in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Our podcast daydreamer/showrunner is Kelly Allen, and Pedagogy A Go-Go is produced by Jeff Armstrong. If you've got any questions, please send them to pedagogyagogo@gmail.com. Our social media handle is @pedagogyagogo, and you can stop by our website at www.pedagogyagogo.com for copies of podcast transcripts, guest assignments, and other useful tidbits. Keep in mind there are no hyphens or dots in any of the above web addresses. Until next time, this is Gina and Tom saying, take care and teach well.